it's a big deal. Yeah.
Anna Mulrine, defense correspondent with the Christian Science Monitor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Libby.
To find out more about the budget, you can go to our website, cspan.org/budget. We have a budget hub there with more information. We'll go now to the floor of the House of Representatives, which is getting underway with morning business.
Speaker. The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., February 15th, 2012. I hereby appoint the Honorable Virginia Foxx to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 17, 2012, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Gutierrez, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this next Sunday, February 19th, I will be joining thousands of Puerto Ricans in Old San Juan behind the banners of Casa Pueblo, labor unions, environmental groups, and many other leaders of Puerto Rico's civic society. The people will exercise their democratic right to demand redress from their government. In this particular instance, they're demanding clear explanations of the many contradictions, misleading statements, and scandals associated with the natural gas project popularly known as Gasoducto and misnamed by the Puerto Rican regime as Via Verde, or the Greenway. Now it looks like the regime, which fired tens of thousands of public sector employees, alleging that there was no money to pay their salaries, has wasted more than $50 million on a project that was never needed, was never practical, and was never supported by the public, a project that many think may now be dead. It is also a project with a history of troubling insider deals and suspect relationship. Mr. Speaker, I proudly march with thousands of people from across the island as we make our opposition to the Gasoducto clear. We will start at the Capitolio, the Capitol building in Old San Juan, at 10 a.m. and march to the Fortaleza. That's the governor's mansion. One of our key messages is to the federal government, and specifically to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I wrote to the Secretary of the Army asking for an investigation of this very cozy relationship between the Jacksonville, Florida District Office of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Florida-based consulting company made up mostly of retired Corps of Engineers staffers hired by the Puerto Rican regime in order to advocate for the pipeline. I'm still waiting for a response to my request, but in the meantime I ask, why does the Corps waste taxpayers' money continuing to evaluate a gas pipeline for which there is no gas? Why are we still considering a costly pipeline instead of a more affordable alternative? Why are we still considering a project that has raised serious objections from the U.S. EPA and the Fish and Wildlife Service and environmental groups across the country? Why are we still considering a project opposed by no less than 70% of the people on the island of Puerto Rico? The public has turned against the project, its price tag, its danger, and its complete lack of justification. Key decision makers in the private sector and in the federal government and in the Puerto Rican government, even up to and including the governor himself, are slowly backpedaling from what has been a headlong rush to build a 92-mile gas pipeline. Even still, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers consider to continue a permit for reasons that are simply unclear to me and anyone else, except they may wish to continue to do their friends' bidding. Yes, their friends that they left behind at the office, who soon will leave that federal government office to join them in the private sector. Oh, the ways of Washington, D.C. But the people of Puerto Rico have already declared permit denied. This coming Sunday in Old San Juan, we will stand together, environmental leaders, labor leaders, and we will speak out loud and clear. Permit to destroy the environment? Denied. Permit to put lives at risk? Denied. Permit to disregard the views and the voices of the people? Denied. Permit to waste money to lavish the friends of the regime with no-bid contracts? denied. Yes, Mr. Speaker, most people in Puerto Rico are convinced the gasoducto is dead. But I will be proud to join the voice of the Puerto Rican people next Sunday as we remain vigilant and firm in our opposition to this wasteful, dangerous, and abusive project. Together we will continue to work to allow fairness and justice to reign once again on the island of Puerto Rico.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to call attention to one of the world's oldest and most preventable health tragedies and to recognize efforts underway to address it. I'm speaking of the needless and preventable death of women in pregnancy and childbirth. Motherhood is, of course, at the heart of much of what we value and cherish in our civilization. Yet even today, in this age of scientific achievement, becoming a mother still carries great risk. During the next 10 years, an estimated 3 million women may die attempting to bring new life into the world. This is approximately 1,000 mothers per day. Yet when a mother dies, we lose so much. Her baby is at greater risk, and so are her other children. Families are torn apart, and some are thrust into poverty or deeper into poverty. Maternal mortality is a problem in the developing world. It is also a problem, Madam Speaker, in the United States of America. As I understand the figures, mothers dying around the time of childbirth doubled here in this country between 1990 and 2008. Unfortunately, women in the United States have a higher risk of dying from pregnancy-related complications than women in 38 other countries. Yet in acknowledging this tragedy, I rise to recognize and applaud efforts that bring real hope. In my district in White House Station, New Jersey, the healthcare company Merck has just announced a new program, Merck for Mothers. Merck has pledged $500 million over the next decade to help alleviate this situation, complications of pregnancy and childbirth. The people of Merck will dedicate their expertise to help make proven solutions more widely available, to develop new technologies, and to improve public awareness to save lives. Making progress against this complex challenge will not be easy. It is not purely a medical problem, and there are no magic bullets. I applaud Merck and other organizations and individuals who are dedicating their time, their resources, and their expertise to creating an environment where no woman has to die in order to bring a child into the world. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, it was an ancient Greek playwright who originally said, "Truth is the first casualty of war." More than 2,500 years later, those words still hold painfully and tragically true. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll join several of my colleagues in meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who has embarked on a brave truth-telling campaign about the war in Afghanistan. After 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, Lieutenant Colonel Davis has written 2 reports, one classified, one unclassified, in which he tells what he has seen. As part of his assignment with the Rapid Equipping Force, he traveled across Afghanistan several times, spanning some 9,000 miles and visiting hundreds of troops, as well as Afghan civilians and Afghan security forces. What he saw were Afghan police that stay in the safe harbor of their checkpoints while allowing the Taliban to roam free. What he saw were Afghan local governments completely unprepared to protect and provide for their people. What he heard were stories of, in his words, how insurgents controlled virtually every piece of land beyond eyeshot of a U.S. or international security assistance force base. Madam Speaker, this is not exactly the story we've been getting from top military brass when they report on the status of the Afghanistan war. Lieutenant Colonel Davis and his experiences is yet one more example of how we're not getting the entire story. As he puts it, and I quote him, "Senior-ranking U.S. military leaders have so distorted the truth when communicating with the U.S. Congress and American people in regards to conditions on the ground in Afghanistan that the truth has become unrecognizable." He continues, this deception has damaged America's credibility among both our allies and enemies, severely limiting our ability to reach a political solution to the war in Afghanistan. Madam Speaker, after everything Americans have sacrificed, the lives, limbs, the mental capacity of thousands of our people, the billions of dollars every month, our global reputation and credibility, the least we are owed is the unvarnished truth. For the price the nation has paid, we deserve the transparency and not the propaganda we're receiving. A good start would be to declassify the National Intelligence Estimate on Afghanistan, as well as the public release of the classified version of Lieutenant Colonel Davis's story. Some have suggested that Lieutenant Colonel Davis is a publicity seeker. And my only response to that is, I certainly hope so. I want the message out. Goodness knows, the other side of the story, the official party line that the Afghanistan war is a strategic success, has gotten plenty of publicity over the last decade. It's about time that a different version of events got close to equal time. I hope my colleagues, in particular those who've supported the Afghanistan war year in and year out, will read what Lieutenant Colonel Davis has written. And I hope they will consider the significant risk he has taken and the patriotism he has shown. I look forward to meeting Lieutenant Colonel Davis today, and I look forward to the nation finally heeding his words, honoring his courage, and vindicating his story by bringing our troops home. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I request permission and unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the date was April the 16th, 1966. The pilot was Sam Johnson, United States Air Force. He was a colonel, and he was doing his second tour of duty in Vietnam. He was flying with a fighter squadron called Satan's Angels. He was a career pilot who had already flown 62 combat missions during the Korean War, flying an F-86 Sabre jet. Colonel Johnson also flew with the famed Air Force Thunderbirds. But on that day, April the 16th, 1966, Colonel Johnson and his F-4 was shot down by ground fire by the North Vietnamese. He was captured. He was put in a prisoner of war camp, and, Madam Speaker, he was in that POW camp for 7 years. Because of the way that he would not give in to the torture and to the interrogation, the enemy moved him to the famous Hanoi Hilton, and a place they called Alcatraz. It was as bad a POW camp that ever existed in history. Alcatraz was where 11 POWs were put because they were the most obstinate men, and they were leaders of other POWs. They were hard-nosed, and they had to be segregated. They called themselves the Alcatraz Gang. They were defiant, and the North Vietnamese called this man right here, Colonel Sam Johnson, Die Hard. They tortured him, but they got no information from him. During that time, that 7 years, he was beaten and tortured. Sam Johnson never broke down. He was so obstinate that they finally decided to put him in solitary confinement, where he remained for 4 years in a cell that was 3 foot wide by 9 foot. During that 4 years, all that was in that cell was a light bulb above his head that the enemy kept on for 24 hours a day. During the nighttime, they put Sam Johnson in leg irons, and during that 4 years, he never saw or talked to another American. While in that POW camp, he and other POWs communicated with each other with a code by tapping on the wall. And during that time, he memorized the names of the other 374 POWs in captivity. He kept that memory going so that when he got away or was released or escaped, he would be able to tell their loved ones who they were and where they were. It was brutal, it was harsh, it was cruel, it was mean. The enemy laughed and made fun of Colonel Sam, and all he ever said was, "Is that the best you can do?" For food, he ate weeds and pig fat and rice. He went from 200 pounds to 120 pounds. And after 7 years of confinement, on February the 12th, 1973, 39 years ago this week, Colonel Sam Johnson was finally released. After his release, Colonel Johnson continued to serve in the United States Air Force for a total of 29 years. And while he was in that POW camp back home in Texas, his wife Shirley knew he was shot down, but she didn't know what happened to him for 2 years, whether he was alive, dead, or missing in action. After he left the United States Air Force, he served in the State House in Texas. He had his own business, and then in 1991, he came to the House of Representatives, where he continues to serve with distinction and represents the folks from Texas. Sam Johnson returned to America with honor. He was a special breed. He was the American breed. He is that special warrior. In that time, he was a captive warrior that never forsook his duty and never forsook his honor. Colonel Sam and other Vietnam veterans were not only treated badly in Vietnam, but many that returned were treated poorly by America. These vets had no welcome home parades. They were cursed. They were spit upon. America did not really appreciate those old war horses from Vietnam. So to Colonel Sam and all that served in Vietnam, welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome home. Some served in return, some served and did not return, some served with the wounds of war. So to Colonel Sam Johnson, we appreciate your service, because the worst casualty of war is to be forgotten, and that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The fancy new software at use in our congressional offices gives us the ability to see all of the constituent contacts, all of their questions, complaints, and concerns by category. You know, I wonder if anyone in Congress has received any complaints about the Safe Routes to School program. I'll bet not. So why is the Republican transportation bill eliminating Safe Routes to School, creating an unsafe route to school? This is a wildly popular program costing a fraction of a % of the transportation budget, and it's had a huge impact nationally on our children because it deals with real consequences for them. A generation ago, 40 or 50% of most children were able to get to school on their own. Now, only 13% can. It's no wonder that childhood obesity has exploded over the same period of time, with 1 in 3 of our children now overweight or obese or seriously at risk. Asthma has gone up for children 74% over the last 5 years. There are real consequences for accidents. 23,000 5 to 15-year-olds were injured and more than 250 kids killed walking or biking in 2009. Getting our children to school in the morning represents 10 to 14% of the entire American morning commute. 6.5 billion trips, stretching 30 billion miles. Doesn't it make sense to do something about the congestion, the injury, the death, and obesity? Absolutely. 20 years ago, as Portland's Commissioner of Public Works, I started a program in my city to help teach kids how to get to school safely and to improve road and sidewalk conditions. 10 years ago, we started a national program, Safe Routes to School. Schools with these programs show 20 to 200% increase in the number of kids walking or biking. Studies show these students are healthier, they do better in school. There's a 49% decrease in accident rates, according to a recent California study. So why are my Republican friends advancing a transportation bill attacking Safe Routes to School, stripping it out, making it an unsafe route to school? Well, it's a fitting metaphor for perhaps the worst transportation bill in history. I think that may be one of the reasons they were afraid to have even a single hearing on the package that's coming to the floor this week. They attacked the foundation of 20 years of balanced transportation reform. It shatters the 30-year partnership between transit and road interests that gave 80% to roads, 20% to a transit account, brokered by Ronald Reagan's administration. It undercuts the role of local government and metropolitan areas to shape and control their own destiny, leaving them to the tender mercy of bureaucrats in their state capital. But it's not just Safe Routes to School. They attack high-speed rail, bicycles, Amtrak. They attack the basic environmental and public participation protections that have been gutted, that actually have been very important to make sure that we have good projects that aren't held up politically or in court. Sadly, I'm disappointed, having worked for years with a broad coalition of highway, professional, environmental, labor, business groups towards a good transportation bill and a coalition that can work together for the badly needed transportation resources. This Republican bill splits away valuable allies and will make it almost impossible to get the resources we need in the future. And of course, their bill is $5 billion short for highways after taking all these resources and stuffing it in. This is simply the worst highway bill ever. The first we've seen that has not been at least a semblance of bipartisan, something that's never been considered in committee. Too timid to do the job, it recklessly abandons the trust fund principle, raising the ire of budget hawks for abandoning user pays. It guts the most popular programs that help stretch dollars and improve communities. And as I say, it shatters the coalition that we need to deal with the future resources. Mercifully, this theological statement, sloppy, incomplete, and ill-considered, has no chance of ever being enacted into law, but it's important that the House reject it.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Dole, for 5 minutes. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the core functions of the government is to invest in infrastructure and transportation. This is not a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. It's an American one. At a time when people are so desperately looking for Washington to come together, this is an issue that we should and can work together on. This week we're debating the transportation bill. While there are many great qualities about this bill, there is still need, and I would argue a great need, to improve it. That's why I'm pleased that there are literally hundreds of amendments to try to strengthen this bill. I hail from the state of Illinois. Illinois is a donor state, which means that we are putting in more transportation funds than we are receiving back from the federal government. That is why I am concerned by the cuts facing our state. We stand to lose almost $650 million. As one of the largest manufacturing hubs of the country, our region cannot afford to lose this critical funding. Our transportation funds help strengthen our local economy and keep jobs at home. Let me be clear. There are some very good steps in this bill that I believe we all should be able to embrace. The bill provides long-term certainty to states when they're planning their transportation projects. We haven't had a transportation bill in a number of years, since 2005, and this would provide a 5-year stability. It includes numerous reforms that enable states to cut through the red tape, speed up completion of projects, many taking about 15 years today. That would be going down to 7 or 8 years in the future. I'm pleased that the bill strengthens the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, which impacts places like Waukegan Harbor. Waukegan Harbor is a critical part of the Great Lakes Harbor system and helps bring jobs home to the 10th District that so desperately needs them. That being said, there are several aspects about this bill that need to be resolved. One of my major areas of concern is that of the environment. Madam Speaker, the bill would open a portion of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, better referred to as ANWR, to oil and gas drilling. For over 50 years, the development of ANWR has been debated greatly. We have an obligation to be good stewards of our national treasures and fiscally responsible in funding our nation's infrastructure. However, including the Arctic Refuge drilling provision will greatly complicate the transportation bill moving forward and make agreement with the Senate far more difficult. ANWR should be the last resort, not the first one. I'm also concerned with the future sustainability of transit funding. In the Chicagoland region, we depend on mass transit to lessen congestion on our roads and to get people to and from work. We do this far more efficiently with mass transit. 50% of the people on the area's highways and interstates would be increased if it were not for mass transit. So think about that. For the people back there that have driven through Chicago, if we were to add an additional 50% on the already congested roads, it would make life far more difficult for moving goods and services around, for getting people to and from work. This is not what we need. Mass transit is a vital program and one that we need to preserve. They need to have the certainty out there for funding. In Illinois, our state will face a $137 million shortfall each and every year if this bill is enacted as it stands right now, and this is unacceptable. With all this being said, I believe that we have much to do, and we can work together to build the transportation bill that states and gives long-term planning and completes projects faster. But we do not need to do so at the detriment of mass transit or the environment. So let's work together and make this a better bill that we can all be proud of and move our country forward. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a founder and co-chair of the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus, I rise again to sound the alarm about the crisis of poverty in America. While many of us are encouraged by recent improvements in the unemployment rate, which fell to 8.3%, the rate of unemployment continues to be unacceptably high, especially for communities of color. For African Americans, the unemployment rate is 13.6% and it's 10.5% for Latinos. The rate of unemployment for our youth is even more alarming, with over 23% of 16 to 19-year-olds looking for a job. Without a job, Madam Speaker, how can we expect our youth, the future of this country, to develop the skills and experience they need to succeed and live out their American dream? Encouragingly, President Obama understands that we cannot speed up economic recovery without investments that create jobs. I was pleased to see in his 2013 budget proposal critical investments to create good jobs and his job training programs for communities hardest hit by our struggling economy. By targeting economic assistance where it's most needed, The President's proposed budget goes a long way to level the playing field to give every American the opportunity to succeed. There's a lot that my Republican colleagues can learn from the President's budget, especially this, that fighting poverty and reducing the deficit can be achieved together. But let me be clear, this budget is not perfect. There are cuts in this budget that would undermine some of the progress our economy is making. Cuts to safety net programs like the Community Services Block Grant, low-income heating assistance, and affordable housing programs will hit already struggling families especially hard. During these difficult times, we really do need to protect programs that are a lifeline for the most vulnerable. We need to increase funding for programs like SNAP and WIC, which keeps millions of American families out of poverty. But keeping people from suffering the worst effects of poverty is not enough to restore our economy. Even with the recent increases we have seen in job creation, long-term unemployment remains at record levels, with 5.5 million workers who have been out of work for 27 weeks or more. And until Republican leaders in the House can pass President Obama's American Jobs Act or put forth any kind of reasonable plan for job creation, we must ensure that the safety net is strong. And so, Madam Speaker, again, I call for an immediate up or down vote on Congressman Bobby Scott and my bill, H.R. 589, which will give the millions of job seekers who continue to struggle to find a job just 14 more weeks of vital unemployment benefits. This would allow them to have just a little more time to find a good job and to support their family while our fragile economy continues to recover. Also, Madam Speaker, this Congress has a lot of work to do. We are just a few days away from when unemployment benefits are set to expire for millions of Americans across the country. Low-income families were hardest hit during the recession, and they could not afford another year of a Republican Congress that fails to focus on jobs, refuses to strengthen our middle class, and tries to end the Medicare guarantee for all of our seniors. It's incumbent upon this conference committee to ensure that the bridge is strong enough to deliver us all, even our most vulnerable, over these troubled waters. Madam Speaker, let's put our nation before our party. Americans really cannot wait, and neither should this Congress. I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Graves, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And we're hearing a lot about transportation this week, and it's a transportation reauthorization bill. That causes us to maybe reflect back. Why are we reauthorizing something, and where did it originate, and what is our plan forward? In fact, this comes from decades and decades and decades ago. And it's a chance when we can say to ourselves, are we on the right path? Is this the right path for this Congress and the future of our nation? And I think back to the last election cycle when the American people said, we want to see things done just a little bit different. And I want to talk about that just a little bit this morning. Because today, when it comes to transportation, all states pay 18.4 cents per gallon for every gallon of gas they purchase. And they send that to the federal government, and the federal government's distributing that out across the country. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that comes back to our states, doesn't it? Well, in fact, it does not. There are 28 states in this nation that send money to the federal government and don't get it all back, Georgia being one of them, along with many others throughout the country. We're referred to as the donor states. So in addition to these 28 states not getting back all their money, there are all these mandates that occur to each and every one of these states. So as we can imagine, these 28 states, they want to get back all of their money. And in fact, Georgia sent a resolution to Congress. And I wanted to read a section of it here and then submit it for the record, because the Georgia General Assembly said that this body, meaning Georgia General Assembly, urges the federal government to cease the collection of motor fuel taxes in Georgia so that the state can collect and distribute the taxes without the delay caused by the federal collection and disbursement. So Georgia and many other states are asking for changes. They're asking for the federal government to do something just a little bit different, but yet we're entering into this debate about reauthorization when maybe we just need to rethink the program altogether. Now in Georgia, $800 million was not received by the state of Georgia. It was submitted by the taxpayers of Georgia, the hardworking Georgians sending money to the federal government. $800 million of it was sent somewhere else across the country in the last reauthorization. $15 billion from the other states were sent to states outside of their boundaries to be spent on other projects. Now, this program started in 1956. And in 1956, when Congress was debating the interstate system, it was a great debate. And as they debated it, they said this will be a short-term tax that we're going to implement. It will be a tax that will be starting at 3%, will last for 15 years, build an interstate system, had a great plan to do it. And there was a debate about it. Well, what happens when we come to the end of that 15-year period? Well, here's a part of an exchange that occurred in the Ways and Means Committee when they were debating this tax. And it was in 1956 when Congressman Boggs of Louisiana and Congressman Fallon of Maryland, they were discussing what would happen during this expiration period. And in that exchange, both congressmen agreed that at the end of the 15-year authorization period, the interstate, and this is their quote, the interstate system is built and paid for, and there is no obligation beyond the period of construction. And yet here we are, 2012, so far removed from that debate, and not only are we at 3 cents per gallon, we're at 18.4 cents per gallon. At the end of that 15 years, it was actually supposed to go to 1.5 cents, but ever since it's always gone up. And yet here we debate about spending more and more and more money, and we've just learned from previous speakers that this isn't even going all to roads and bridges and highways. In fact, it's going to bike paths, planting flowers and bushes, walking trails, and other things. Shouldn't it be about moving people and freight? That's what it was always about. So as we consider the reauthorization, I hope we'll consider maybe a reflection of a new program, a new path forward. So I'm offering an amendment that changes all this. It says, you know what, it's complete. The interstate system has reached that point of completion. Maybe let's devolve this back to the states. Let's empower the states to collect their taxes, as Georgia is asking to do, spend it on their priorities, not deal with the red tape of Washington or the exchange fee that's occurring, but in fact empower the states to collect their taxes at the rates that they choose and spend it on the priorities that are most important to them. Keep it back in the home states where they know where the needs are. Instead, we're up here debating how they should spend their money and mandating all these hundreds of various program lines that they've got to spend it on. So we'll be offering an amendment that just changes the debate a little bit and causes us to reflect, refocus on where transportation should be as we are in the 21st century. So, Madam Speaker, as I close, and as we move into this debate on reauthorization, I hope it'll be a time when this Congress remembers what the American people said in 2010. Let's eliminate some of this government and devolve it back to the states.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Alabama, Ms. Sewell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. Today I rise to recognize the critical role of community colleges and the role that they play in economic recovery and the continued growth of our communities across the 7th Congressional District of Alabama and this entire nation. In the 7th Congressional District, the state of Alabama and this country, the most important issue is job creation. In parts of the 7th Congressional District that I am so privileged to represent, unemployment rates are as high as 16%. This persistent high unemployment number demonstrates the importance of career training and development. They are important and critical parts of our nation's growth. And I think that the junior colleges, our community college system, can play a vital role in developing our nation's greatest resource, our people. A lasting partnership between the private sector and community colleges is key to creating an economy built to last. These partnerships ensure that future workers are being prepared to take advantage of every opportunity in the employment sector as we recover in this economy. In order to win the future, we must continue to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-compete our global competitors. I want to commend the President on his recent release of a blueprint to train 2 million workers for high-demanding industries through our Community College to Career Fund. The new $8 billion Community College to Career Fund would promote the development of community college partnerships that would train skilled workers for unfulfilled jobs. What a great way to not only promote our community colleges, but also help to train future workers. As America regains its position as the world's preeminent innovator and developer, the need for trained, skilled workforce becomes even greater. This proposed fund would train and support the training of workforce development all throughout our nation. The Community College to Career Fund will also institute a pay for performance in job training. This new initiative will serve as an incentive to businesses that will provide and help them provide workforce training. It will also help individuals find employment while encouraging businesses to assist workers in this endeavor. This is critically important, and it is not only enough to train our workers, but we must also ensure that they can find jobs right here in America. In addition, this job training fund, state and local governments will be allowed to apply for grants that will help them recruit businesses to their states. This incentive to locate businesses right here in America will help create jobs, disencourage outsourcing, and encouraging insources. We have to start making things right here in America and promote that endeavor. We must create an environment that gives more Americans a fair shot at achieving the American dream, a dream that the unemployed in my district and across this nation are waiting to grasp. They just need opportunities and resources. The Community to Career Fund will inspire and train the next generation of entrepreneurs. These workers could be responsible for the next Google, the next Apple, Microsoft, or other cutting-edge technology. It will promote American exceptionalism and will propel this nation back to the forefront of workforce development. The President's blueprint to build a highly skilled workforce through our community college system is the right thing to do. It will allow community colleges in my district, for example, Shelton State and Wallace State Community College, greater access to resources to educate those ready and willing to take jobs, highly skilled jobs in our workforce. At a time when these initiatives are critically important because we in America can ill afford to be left behind when it comes to innovation, I believe that the President's blueprint should be applauded and supported. I know that in my own district, Mercedes-Benz, a very important employer in my district, has taken such initiatives to another level. They've encouraged high school students, giving them a chance to learn how to use their machines and participate in a program. And they've also said that upon completion, 75% of those students will actually have a job in Mercedes-Benz plant in Vance, Alabama. I think initiatives such as this should be encouraged. It's critically important that we not only support private sector in their endeavors to create public partnerships with our community colleges, but also to grow our economy and help this recovery effort actually exist. So I support these endeavors and I support the President in this initiative. I look forward to working with the President on this initiative and supporting this initiative in this House, and I ask and urge all of my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to support such an initiative. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas arise?
I request the address ask for 5 minutes and seek unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On Monday of this week, on Monday 2 days ago, the President released his budget plan. It will take America's deficits to our total debt to over $27 trillion. That's a big number. It's hard to get our heads around numbers like that. So I want to talk about how it impacts a particular industry and a particular group of people, how his budget and plan will put under attack 1.2 million Americans, an industry known as general aviation that generates over $150 billion for our U.S. economy. Now, the general aviation industry is an industry that this President has been assaulting ever since he took office. It is one of America's last great manufacturing sectors, indeed a manufacturing jewel still here in America. And yet it has become a bit of a political punching bag for our President, who constantly refers to the entire industry as nothing but made up of corporate fat cat jet owners. But I want to talk about the job creation aspects. I want to talk about how the general aviation industry impacts real people. I want to tell some real stories about how lives are impacted when a President speaks about an industry this way and then presents a budget that has such an enormous impact. there are real consequences. I can tell you that each time the President attacks the general aviation industry, a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas is impacted, a West Virginia company loses a sale, or a private company putting jet fuel on airplanes in California feels the squeeze. I want to recall some of the attacks, but I also want to talk about these people. This general aviation industry produces aircraft that are a tool that increases productivity and ultimately the success of businesses all across our country. It's about helping a parts supplier, a fellow named Jim who wrote a story to me from Plainwell, Michigan. Helps him deliver parts all across the country so not only can his company succeed and grow jobs, but all of the folks that Jim's company serves. It's about getting a daughter to a hospital who's very ill on an Angel Flight, a wonderful nonprofit organization that uses excess capacity for small planes all around the country to meet the medical needs of people all across our nation. It's about the town of Fort Morgan, Colorado, whose local industries rely heavily on general aviation and which is an absolute lifetime for this small town's continuing success. It's about a fellow named William in Mobile, Alabama, who wrote me and said, quote, I work for a manufacturer. We build jet engines for the general aviation industry. We've seen firsthand how President Obama's rhetoric hurts our industry. We lose sales. Why would the President attack an industry that provides hundreds of thousands of good union jobs when he says that his entire focus is those jobs? I wish the President would encourage general aviation and not attack it. Well, I think Williams got it exactly right. You know, many in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas, which has the headquarters for Beechcraft and Learjet and Cessna, know these stories all too well also. You know, for the third time now in the President's budget, he's called for user fees on every flight of every general aviation aircraft and has set up a system whereby it will become more expensive through the tax code to purchase these aircraft, these American-built aircraft. But it impacts lots of folks in different places, not just the manufacturers. Chris from Los Angeles wrote me and said, my little flight school employs 5 full-time workers and 3 part-time employees. Up through now, I've been able to weather the economic storms. Unfortunately, despite the claims that piston aircraft will be exempt, these user fees will hurt us, Mr. President. I'll be forced to shut my doors, thereby laying off my employees. Madam Speaker, this is not about fat cat corporate jet owners in the corner office. This is about the livelihood of those 8 people in California who depend on this industry to put food on the table for their families. Carl from Plano, Texas wrote me and said, like others have said, a large percentage of people who use business aircraft do it for productivity as a tool. I wish Washington would recognize that an airplane is a tool just like machinery and a delivery truck. The whole time the President is criticizing the aircraft flying industry, he flies around in one of the great jets built in Kansas, Air Force One. His cabinet members and senior staff fly on airplanes all across the world, and I'm proud of that. But unfortunately, the President doesn't see the value in general aviation except for when it's his own. I've invited the President multiple times to come to Wichita, Kansas to see the workers who build these great planes. And yet it continues. The President tries to destroy an industry that employs over 1 million people. This is not leadership. This is division and envy. And I wish the President would cease to do so. It's a travesty. It's not good for jobs in America, and it's not good for our general aviation industry. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As one of only a handful of engineers in Congress, I'm proud to once again sponsor a resolution honoring our nation's engineers during National Engineers Week. Next week will mark the 61st Annual Engineers Week. In the 8th year, I have introduced this resolution. And I'd like to thank the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Manzullo, for joining me in leading this bipartisan effort for the 2nd consecutive year. The central goal of Engineers Week, attracting new students to engineering careers, has never been more important. As the 2010 National Academies report explained, while only 4% of the nation's workforce is composed of scientists and engineers, this group disproportionately creates jobs for the other 96%. Engineers drive our economy by designing and building everyday products, including bridges, airplanes, roads, computers, medical devices, cars, power plants, just to name a few. America's 2.5 million engineers have helped make our country great by solving problems and turning dreams into reality, and America's future depends on them. In these uncertain times, we always look for ways to promote job creation. Educating America's youth about engineering and science needs to be a national priority. Each year, National Engineers Week seeks to do just this, through events aimed at inspiring students and fostering public awareness of the vital contributions made by engineers. These events, including the Future City Competition, Introduce a Girl to Engineering Day, and Discover Engineering Family Day, all impart an appreciation of the wonders of engineering to children of all backgrounds. The importance of these events is underscored by a 2012 survey by the Intel Corporation that found American teenagers are more likely to consider a degree in engineering after learning about what engineers do. And this year's theme is 7 billion people, 7 billion dreams, 7 billion chances for engineers to turn dreams into reality. This theme emphasizes the potential for growth among the community of engineers worldwide. It also highlights a challenge to our position as a global leader in engineering. Last month, the latest science and engineering indicators released by the National Science Board showed that the number of students obtaining engineering degrees in the United States continues to rise. But our production of new engineering degrees has been dramatically eclipsed by China, where 30% of all undergraduate degrees are in engineering, compared to the 4% in the United States. Inspiring bright young minds to consider careers in engineering is more important than ever for our economic competitiveness. Growing up in Chicago, I was fascinated by figuring out how mechanical devices worked. I remember how my high school calculus teacher and physics teacher at St. Ignatius helped mold this fascination into an interest in engineering. These teachers, together with informal experiences like at the Museum of Science and Industry and the Brookfield Zoo, helped motivate me to pursue an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at Northwestern University, and then a degree in engineering economic systems at Stanford University. One of the central goals of National Engineers Week is to provide this kind of inspiration for the next generation. During Engineers Week, I will be attending the Chicago Engineering Awards benefit, where the Washington Award will be presented to Chicago native and pioneer of the cell phone, Martin Cooper, and also where students will be honored for their participation in numerous competitions, including the Future City Competition. I'm always greatly inspired when I go to this banquet to see one of the great pioneers of engineering talk about the work they've done and to see the students and the work that they're doing today and know the future of our country will be great with their help. Madam Speaker, I'd like to encourage all my colleagues to co-sponsor this resolution, but more importantly, to go home and participate in Engineers Week celebrations in your districts. This is a great opportunity for us to thank the engineers who contribute so much to our country and inspire the next generation of engineers that our country needs to stay competitive. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
House and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise to talk for a few minutes about security. I know that almost no member is willing to vote against something that has the word security attached to it, but I wish that most members would consider these words from Ian Lustig. Professor Lustig is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he wrote several years after 9/11 about the war on terror money feeding frenzy. And he wrote this, quote, "After September 11, 2001, what accounts for the vast discrepancy between the terrorist threat facing America and the scale of our response? Why, absent any evidence of a serious domestic terror threat, is the war on terror so enormous, so all-encompassing, and still expanding? The fundamental answer is that al-Qaeda's most important accomplishment was not to hijack our planes, but to hijack our political system. For a multitude of politicians, interest groups, professional associations, corporations, media organizations, universities, local and state governments, and federal agency officials, the war on terror is now a major profit center, a funding bonanza, and a set of slogans and sound bites to be inserted into budget, project, grant, and contract proposals. For the country as a whole, however, it has become a maelstrom of waste. And he pointed out an example that even Dunkin' Donuts franchises had received $22 million in federal counterterrorism loans. Madam Speaker, in addition to that, shortly after 9/11, when every government department and agency was requesting more money for security, the Wall Street Journal carried an editorial that said, quote, "Any bill with the word security in it should get double the public scrutiny and maybe 4 times the normal weight, lest all kinds of bad legislation become law under the phony guise of fighting terrorism." Unfortunately, we haven't followed the guidance of Professor Lustig or the Wall Street Journal. I thought of these writings by Mr. Lustig and the Wall Street Journal when I read 2 recent articles. On December 20th, 2 months ago, Vanity Fair magazine carried an article on its website which said, quote, "As you stand in endless lines this holiday season, here's a comforting thought. All those security measures accomplished nothing at enormous costs." The magazine said since 9/11, the U.S. government has spent more than $1.1 trillion on homeland security. Then the article added this, quote, "To a large number of security analysts, this expenditure makes no sense. The vast cost is not worth the infinitesimal benefit. Not only has the actual threat been exaggerated, they say, but the great bulk of the post-9/11 measures to contain it are little more than security theater, actions that accomplish nothing but are designed to make the government look like it is on the job. In fact, the continuing expenditure on security may actually have made the United States less safe." And then a second article by ABC News. Probably, Madam Speaker, the most needless, useless agency in the entire federal government is the Air Marshal Service. USA Today once reported that more air marshals had been arrested than were arrests by air marshals. Talk about a soft, easy job. All these people do is ride back and forth on airplanes, back and forth, mostly in first class. A few days ago, ABC News reported that air marshals took taxpayer-paid trips to visit families and to go to vacation spots. One supervisor was even photographed asleep on a flight while carrying a loaded pistol. ABC reported that managers at the Air Marshal Service acted like, quote, "a bunch of schoolyard punks," and that they, quote, "repeatedly made fun of blacks, Latinos, and gays," according to agency insiders. I guess they had too much time on their hands and too little to do. I know, as I said earlier, that it's almost impossible to get Congress to vote against anything that claimed to be for security. But this almost $1 billion that we give to air marshals each year is a total, complete waste. When we go ridiculously overboard, Madam Speaker, on security, we are taking money away from individuals and families who really need it, and taking money away from other good things on which this money could be spent. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I rise again today to highlight the epidemic of rape and sexual assault in the military. You know, this issue was recently brought up on Fox News by a commentator who ignorantly declared that women who joined the military should expect to be raped. Yes, believe it or not, this was what the commentator said. I don't think our women choose to enlist in the military with the expectation that they might get raped. This morning I'm going to tell you the story of U.S. Marine Stephanie Schroeder, who was raped in a public restroom by a fellow Marine. He shoved her down, beat her, and forced her on her back. He ripped down her pants and raped her. Then he ejaculated on her in her thigh and spit on her. Private Schroeder reported the rape to command. Her commander laughed at her and said, "Don't come blanking to me because you had sex and changed your mind." Don't come blanking to me? That's the response that was given to Private Schroeder. That was her leader. That was her commander saying that to her. Instead of helping her, her commander called her a liar and restricted her from seeking medical help or any type of counseling. And what's worse is that her commander did nothing illegal. The military judicial system allows commanders complete discretion for handling cases of rape and sexual assault. To the current standard of justice, the commander did absolutely nothing wrong. This story is one of thousands that happens during the military every year. By the Department of Defense's own statistics, 19,000 men and women are sexually assaulted or raped in the military every year. This is not a secret. Congress and the DoD have worked on this issue for a quarter of a century, but very little has changed. The issue has been treated like a game of tag. Congress calls a hearing and then tag. DoD submits a report. Then tag. Congress has a hearing, then tag. DoD has a press conference about a new report. The game goes on, but no real changes actually occur. Well, I have my own game. It's called Truth or Dare. First, truth. The women in our military are more likely to be raped or assaulted by colleagues than they are to be killed by the enemy. Truth. Only 13.5% of victims report the crime. Truth. Only 8% of the cases are actually prosecuted. Truth. The sole arbiters of reports of assault and commanders who decide which rapists are punished and will go free are, in fact, the commanders. And now there's a dare. I dare the Department of Defense to create a better, fairer process for handling rapes and sexual assaults. Instead of continuing a system that punishes victims and sweeps sexual offenses under the rug, I dare the Department of Defense to create an impartial office to review and handle these cases with experts in prosecution and investigation. So what actually happened to Sergeant Schroeder? Well, she got transferred away from her rapist to a new duty location. Prior to her arrival, her command called and told her new supervisors that she was, quote, a troublemaker. 2 weeks after the transfer, her new superior made a pass at her. She refused to have sex with him, and he retaliated by publicly harassing her at work. When she contracted pink eye, he asked her in front of a formation if she let a guy ejaculate in her eye. She reported the harassment to command. Nothing happened. A month later, she awoke to the same supervisor sexually assaulting her. Again, she reported to her command. This time, the command took action against Private Schroeder. She was disciplined for having a man in her room. Private Schroeder, the victim of sexual assault, was punished after a sex offender broke into her room and harmed her. Private Schroeder learned not to report crimes committed against her, so 6 months later, when she was sexually assaulted again by a Marine in a truck, she told no one how he attempted to have sex with her, or how, when she refused, he began to masturbate in front of her and locked the doors so she could not leave. He said, "Show me your tits and help me masturbate, and you masturbate for me." This is outrageous conduct that should not be allowed in our military. For now, victims of rape and sexual assault must follow the chain of command, even if their commanding officer chooses to ignore the problem. We need to overhaul this system. I've introduced H.R. 3435, the STOP Act, that would take these cases out of the chain of command and